the Evolution Security Podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the EvoSec podcast. My name is Eric Davis, one half of the Tactical Twins. Unfortunately, Aaron can't be with us this morning because he's got day job stuff to do, but I'm sure he's going to be listening to this interview because he was super excited to hear that you guys were going to be on. But to our audience members out there, we got a couple of awesome guests. We have Sarah Adams and Dave Benton, two survivors of the Benghazi attacks in 2012, which I will say that, to you guys, Sarah and Dave, again, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you guys coming on.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
So first off, I'll say, Dave, I'm still, enjoying thinking of some of the subjects that you covered in your class at the Combative Summit, which is where I met you. First off, I'll say, what did you think of that summit?
I thought the summit was excellent. John did a wonderful job of bringing together very high-level combatives instructors, and the student base was just as skilled. It was an excellent, excellent seminar.
Yeah, I was baffled at how awesome it was. Now, I knew John. I've known John for a while, and I knew John was going to put on an awesome event. But for it being the inaugural event, I mean, it was almost like that had been going on for 20 years, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really was. And then Ben's facility helped as well and really set the tone for a combative seminar.
Yeah, and the fact that he had that the room or home structure was perfect for your content and for the audience members out there. I've mentioned Dave's class in some AARs, and I think I said it to you maybe when we were on the ground. My expertise is really in the direct self-defense piece, and I've never really had much structure clearing, even when I was a soldier. I mean, that just wasn't in my wheelhouse because I wasn't in specialized units or whatnot. But what we always like to say in our world of combatives, and especially those that are integrating weapons, is we love a reductionist type structure to anything that we're doing. And even though structure clearing has its complexities, you did a superb job of breaking it down to the reductionist information that was necessary. And I felt like I walked away and in my house here, I've been, using the concepts that you taught us and really just getting a better foundation in structure clearing. So I really appreciate that.
Excellent.
So with that start, so the main reason that I had you guys on, of course, is this excellent book. And I'll say you guys put together so much, obviously it's intelligence in here, right? That you guys gathered, both during and obviously you guys spent a lot of time. What was about the total time that you guys spent? I mean, clearly the book just released this last year. So this was a work that started back in 2012, correct?
Yeah.
It did start back in 2012, and it took us about 7 years to complete.
Yeah, we actually really started the investigation you see in the book in 2015. So we're about to start our 9th year of the actual investigation.
Well, what I will tell you is kind of what I was going to allude to back when I started this. When those attacks took place, trying to be astute of international affairs and what we're doing abroad as best I can, we try to pay attention to that. Of course, a lot of this can also affect our safety here in the United States clearly. But I remember when those attacks took place, and even with the start of the narrative about the YouTube video and all that, I mean, I from the very beginning said, this does not smell right. even some of the intel that we were getting open source on the media just told me that there's no way this was a protest. And so that's the first question I'll ask you guys. How frustrating was it when you guys had been in the thick of that and you guys knew what was going on? How frustrating was that?
I'll just answer it from my perspective, and then I'll let Sarah give her take, because we had two different perspectives. When it happened to us, the team, we actually didn't know. So we weren't aware of the fake narrative after the incident. We were actually secluded for about a week and a half. So we had no outside influence. We didn't see what was going on TV, and we never heard that it was a fake protest narrative. We knew from day one it was terrorism.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I went to Tripoli and then I started working the investigation, basically the day after the attacks. And we were pushing back pretty hard on the fake narrative, but maybe about a week or so after the attacks is when we got the videos that actually showed it was a direct assault on the compound. And even when we got the videos, I called to say, hey, now it's time you change this bad analysis because we have the video, and they never actually changed the analysis after that. So that's the point I knew, okay, this is political. People are being weak and letting the politicians play their games, and we're not going to be a part of it. And so I basically stepped back from the game at that point.
Just so the listeners are clear, though, the intelligence community knew from day one, the government knew from day one that it was in fact a terrorist attack and it wasn't a protest.
Correct.
That's exactly what I ascertained myself from, of course, reading the 13 Hours in Benghazi book. And before we get too far, I really would like for our audience members that may not know you, a lot of folks will, because our audience is pretty astute, and I've talked about this book already on our show. But for audience members that may not know you guys, can Sarah, starting with you, can you provide our audience with a summary of your background and what led up to 2012 for you?
Yeah, sure. My background was I joined the CIA as basically expert on the Kashmir region, so between India and Pakistan, and I went into basically the Pakistan-Afghanistan department at the CIA. I worked in that for several years, and then after the fall of Gaddafi, I got asked by the chief of station out in Libya if I would come out and help kind of kick off capture operations of terrorists in Libya, because nothing existed then, right? There was no intelligence organization in the country. We had no legal approvals. We didn't even have assets, like air assets, like drones, for example. So it was in January of 2012, I actually went into Libya, into the capital. I didn't go to Benghazi until August of 2012, but I spent a good chunk of 2012 in Libya. And then after the attacks, I was still in Libya until November of 2012. So I worked on basically the agency investigation. I helped support the FBI investigation. And then in 2015, I got recruited out of the CIA to support Trey Gowdy's investigation. And then, as we told you, in 2015, we started our own investigation because nobody was looking at the attackers. So I'm up to my top of my head in investigations on this.
Does it sometimes, Sarah, does it get overwhelming with all the information for you? Let me rephrase it this way. Do you sometimes get tired of it?
I get tired of explaining the basics, right? It's been a decade and people still get stuff wrong. And it's like, come on, material's out there now. We've already told you these things were incorrect. Like, you don't have to believe some press article you read 8 years ago. Like, we've put the facts out there now. It's your job to understand them and not spend your time arguing with me, right? So a lot of times I'm getting my time wasted, if that makes sense. It's like, we're busy. We're running a whole investigation still. I don't need to explain things that we've detailed in the book, for example. We're trying to locate people in Libya. It's a huge time consuming commitment, as you can imagine. And it takes a lot of personal resources too.
Well, and Sarah, what I would tell you is that we don't have a massive audience. Our podcast is very niche. I would say that, even more popular podcasts are on the side of just firearms, because firearms and gear is cool. But we are very much a podcast about self-protection. And again, obviously the combative summit was a big part of what I do and what we do professionally ourselves on a lower scale than some of the folks that were instructors there. But my point is that, yeah, we don't have a huge audience, but we have quite a few listeners. So we could get some of that information, but I was going to talk with you guys later in the show, maybe about some of the other avenues that you guys might have been trying to get this book out there. I'm noticing a lot of reviews, so there's a lot of people have been getting this book. So, but maybe further in the show, maybe some other podcasts that you guys have either been on or possibly trying to get on. So, all right, Dave, what about you, buddy? You give a summary of how you got to where you are or where you were at that time.
Well, I started in the military straight out of high school. Left the military, went in law enforcement for a little bit. Stayed there until probably around 2005, where I went to the CIA as part of their global response staff. During that time, I've worked with Sarah in a couple other theaters. At the end of the events that happened, I was actually extended voluntarily for a few days when that attack happened, and I actually wasn't even supposed to be there.
Interesting. I maybe I saw that account. So yeah, you were that. I think was it that you just didn't get evacuated with all the other personnel, is what you're saying, correct?
Well, no, during the attacks, my time during that tour was up. I was
Okay,
actually
I
supposed to
got
be
you.
home. I extended because another fellow GRS member was injured. So I filled that slot and stayed later, as well as Tonto did as well.
But but to your other point, he is a little testy about the fact that when the annex was evacuated, everybody left, and then he was in the last vehicle, and they're like, "Where did everyone go?" So they did kind of like get left behind during the evacuation, which is kind of funny.
That is a fact. At the very, very end, I think they did their head count a little too fast. And myself and a complete vehicle, along with two other people, were left behind. But we caught up pretty quick.
Wow. How long was the duration when the convoy left that you guys got caught up, roughly?
It was about 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. But still, that's basic. That's basic shit, you know. Doing a head count.
Wouldn't be the first time I was left behind.
We've all been there. Got a new leader that's nervous, you know. It does happen, unfortunately. Well, so moving on to some of, you know, the bigger meat of this. So you guys alluded to that all the U.S. personnel, leadership on the ground, and the White House knew that this was terrorism, right? And obviously it was, you know, just before the upcoming election. So that was another aspect of it that I looked at and I was like, man, this is bullshit. Sorry for the swearing. I hope you guys don't mind. It makes me angry. Still to this day, it makes me angry that politicians can bold-faced lie, allow people to be killed, and then essentially cover up what exactly happened for politics. And I know politics are politics. It's been that way. You know, the base word for politics is polis. You know, we're talking about antiquity that politics have been around. But still yet, I like to think, or I used to like to think, that the United States had a more honest and honorable outlook on the world, but it's just not true. So, I mean, you guys again stated that. Now, for the record, you know, who was the person that ordered the attacks? Or I should say, I understand that the NX attack happened after the fact, but who ordered the initial attacks?
Yeah, so it was the head of al-Qa'ida at the time. His name is Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. He was the one killed a couple summers ago in Kabul.
Yeah, and so one of the interesting aspects of your guys' book that you guys do masterfully is you guys connect all that. And what was amazing to me, and again, the fact that, everybody knew, the US knew, but all you have to do is look at who were there, and who were related to that. I mean, we're talking folks that had decades of terrorism throughout the globe, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
So that is another one of the most frustrating aspects to me about what happened after the fact. Now, regarding Zawahiri, what was the, you guys articulate in the book, but that's another aspect that he actually did a video the day before the attacks, correct?
Yes, correct.
Where he specifically stated, hey, especially, pointing out Libyans to attack the Crusaders, correct?
Correct.
And yet the State Department, under Hillary Clinton, did not beef up security, right?
Yeah, I mean, nobody really beefed up security. I mean, even they knew in advance of the Cairo protests, for example, and nobody even beefed up security then. So there was just no attempts to position after his calls, or like I said, the planning in Cairo, which Zawahiri's brother was involved in even planning those protests. So you'd think if somebody's is running a terrorist organization, his brother's planning a protest, maybe we should protect our embassy better. So yeah, it's completely, the ball was dropped all along. And even after he put out his video, you'd think there would be a shuffling of resources like, hey, is this like an immediate threat? And there wasn't even that. DOD didn't even position anybody closer or take their stiff off their training mission or any of that. So it was just like, everyone dropped the ball. It wasn't just State Department of Defense dropped the ball. It was on every level.
It also wasn't just a Libya issue. Obviously, Libya caught the worst of it, but after the fact, or during the time that the Benghazi situation was going on, there are also issues in Yemen. There are also issues in Tunisia. There are also issues in Pakistan. And again, the U.S. posture didn't change.
Yeah, that really is frustrating. And, it seems to me that a lot of the issues seem to reside in your guys' chief of base. You guys call him Bob. And, just from my reading, it just seemed like really piss poor leadership. I mean, he didn't even want to interface with the ambassador, right? When he came to the consulate. I mean, all of these missteps. Am I correct that it seems like a lot of the problems on the ground was your chief of base, correct?
So there's different levels to that. Directly on the ground, from a CIA perspective, yes, the chief of base was a huge friction point. Our team leader was also another huge friction point, but that was locally on the ground. As far as the country of Libya went, the rest of the CIA actually responded very, very well and handled it with good leadership. Now, the other issues are the DoD issue, then the State Department issue, and then ultimately, the National Command Authority, the president, and the rest of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That was also another leadership issue. So it starts tactically and then it goes strategic.
Yeah, good, very good point, Dave. And there were implications because of what took place in Benghazi, right? I mean, after you guys were pulled out, it created kind of a schism throughout that region, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we pulled out of Benghazi, al-Qa'ida was able to really establish a base there. They started at the end of 2011, but after we pulled out, they were actually able to cement a base. And it wasn't until 2014 when a Libyan general went in, and it took them 3 years. And they lost, there's 20,000 civilians killed. He lost over 8,000 of his own soldiers. It took that much loss to actually push al-Qa'ida out of that base in Benghazi. And it was because we abandoned Benghazi.
Well,
Benghazi would have been another Afghanistan before 9/11. Like, Afghanistan was a safe haven for al-Qaeda. And then that's exactly what Benghazi was starting to become before General Haftar pushed them out.
Well, and you guys make the point in the book that, had it not been for him, you know, the ramifications, of course, as you're alluding to, would have been astronomical. And again, U.S. leadership dropping the ball. I mean, we see over and over again. I mean, I love our country. I still think to this day we are still the best country in the world. But unfortunately, it's politicians and policies like what contributed to your guys' attacks and or the aftermath, unfortunately, is what's moving this country into a bad direction. And we're still fairly young. We just have to look at the demise of republics in antiquity. That unfortunately, we can certainly turn this around, but we're not headed in a good direction for maintaining the current republic that we have. I mean, I'll just ask you guys your thoughts on that, because these are the type of, geopolitical policies, and then what politics then contribute to, just for people trying to remain in office, that contribute to our country moving in the wrong direction. If you guys want to make any points about that.
Yeah, I mean, one issue, I mean, I've actually seen, firsthand, is especially since Benghazi over the last decade, is we fund both sides of every conflict, right? So we fund the good guys and we fund the terrorists. I mean, that's obviously what we're doing in Libya, it's what we're doing in Afghanistan, we're now doing in Gaza. So we are creating our own messes, and then even in our own borders, right? We are now doing this at the southern border, right? We are choosing to create this so politicians can argue about something, can pretend they're doing something about something, and the public just is allowing this to happen, and it is going to change the entire trajectory of the future of the U.S.
Well, to your point, we just spoke about this on our show not too long ago, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but essentially starting with this administration that obviously is soft on the border, for political reasons. Let's face it, they don't mind that illegals are coming across the border to assist in census numbers, assist in where they can go and vote illegally. All of that is a big part of that. Also, the fact that we have seen an astronomical uptick in terrorist watch list individuals being captured at the border. I mean, I think in the last 3 years, it went from almost zero to in the hundreds, like each year, like 70, 100, 160 or 70. I think this last year, I'm sure you guys have been seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big problem. A lot of people don't understand some of those nuances you brought up. So since the current president, Biden's been in office, he's let in 8 million illegals, and those are the ones we can count, right? What happens then, the illegals go to the sanctuary cities, and then they become part of the census, as you say, and then the Democrats get more seats. So people need to understand this letting in of the illegals is to basically get more control in Congress. It's actually that simple. Yeah, when we talk about the terrorism watch list, that's even worse, right? Those are the people they luckily were able to fingerprint and know came through the border. The majority of terrorists obviously have the financial resources to not actually have to walk through a real border crossing and interact with, CBP or whomever. So the amount of terrorists that have come to this country, yes, they say it's kind of a little under 200 that they found last year. Now you got to multiply that times 10. So it's very dangerous.
Yeah. And again, it really boils down to who actually was not discovered. And we have all kinds of accounting of especially Hezbollah cells in the United States. Hamas isn't near as active, but of course we know that, al-Qa'ida over the years has sent individuals, they'll sit and wait. Any of these terrorist cells will sit and wait for decades if necessary. So yeah, it's very, very concerning. And again, this show being about self-defense, we're not just talking about, thugs in the streets or whatnot. We're talking about our safety in general. And of course, terrorism can be a devastating and tragic to our self-defense, of course. So, and you made one of the points earlier about, say, Afghanistan and where it's went, and thinking about Gaza right now, is there's U.S. weaponry showing up in Gaza, right? And I wonder how much of that weaponry could have come from both Afghanistan. We left billions and billions of dollars of not just small arms, but heavy equipment, Apaches, heck, you and I were you were a Marine, correct, Dave?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So I think about it this way. Remember how, just as basic soldiering, basic Marine, if we were going to be overrun, we were taught that we were going to destroy our equipment, right? So I don't know why there wasn't some plan in place other than we were supposed to be, um, helping the Afghans with security after we left. But there still had to been some leadership thinking, man, we're leaving behind some serious weaponry that's wound up in the hands of terrorists around the world. I mean, to my knowledge, and I didn't mean to get off on this tangent, but it's related, in my opinion, is how much of that weaponry was sold. I mean, I think China's been in there gathering some of that weaponry. Of course, Iran has been gathering a lot of that weaponry and selling it and pushing it out throughout the world. It's very concerning that I mean, it's not laughable. I don't mean that. It's hysterical, I should say, that we're dealing with that. But yeah, I mean, you guys have probably been seeing all the weaponry, that U.S. weaponry that's been showing up even in Gaza as well.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to leave material in war zones. It's something we've done throughout history. Sometimes it's just cheaper to leave it. Certain sensitive things were destroyed. Then there was a lot of things that were left intact. And it's one thing to leave that weaponry to a legitimate Afghanistan government, partners that we worked with and shed just as much blood as we did fighting that war.
Yep.
But to leave it to the Taliban, to leave it to a known enemy, is just criminal negligence.
Yeah, and what we've done since the attacks actually that occurred in Israel, we've reached out to our networks to kind of decide where some of the weapons came from. And we actually did find out some of the US weapons that showed up in Gaza. They came from Afghanistan, and they were basically moved out of the city called Bahram Chah. It's kind of in southern Afghanistan. And then actually a large number of the weapons actually came from Libya. And they were basically moved there from a number of actually our 2012 Benghazi attackers. And one was actually caught this week. His name is Hashim Abu Sidra. But he was heavily involved in arming Palestinian terrorists. So we would like to see him remain detained because of his role, obviously, in weapons smuggling.
Oh, and that's awesome. That was who you were speaking of earlier, Sarah?
Yes, correct.
Excellent. Well, and that was a point I was going to make too, is that, I understood or believed that some of the weaponry because we were helping the Libyans in the revolution, right? And this is something I've thought about for a while. There's the old axiom that the enemy of your enemy is your friend. But I think you guys make the point, and a thought that I've had for a real long time. Every single time we've teamed up with Islamists, that it's not come out well, right? Your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a consistent issue that we say that phrase, right? But nobody actually listens to it. Obviously, we fought alongside al-Qa'ida to take out Gaddafi. Anyone who says we don't are lying to you. Another thing we do is, though, our State Department is not really positioned well to actually understand when they're dealing with terrorists, right? So even well after our attacks in Libya, they tried to create a military. It was called the Libya National Guard. First off, it was headed by a gentleman named Khalid Sharif, who had actually spent time in our black sites. Okay, so he's running it, and the U.S. had an official relationship with him, and he is actually the key individual who actually set up the weapons that went to Palestine. And this isn't weapons that were left behind by the U.S. in Libya. This is buying brand new purchases of weapons Russian weapons, etc., and sending them to Gaza. So these aren't some old stockpiles that went to Gaza. They got brand new weapons bought by the Libyan government and sent to them through terrorist networks. So a lot of people need to actually understand this. It's not some stuff sitting in someone's shed that terrorists just bought off the black market. These are real weapons purchases by nation states going to terrorists.
Well, and to my knowledge, Iran only had, I believe, a $4 billion available coffers to them prior to this administration, essentially ignoring, sanctions or just not enforcing them. And now I believe they got 70 to 80 billion in liquid cash. And where is that money going to go? Iran, I mean, we have to look back. Iran has connections to 9/11 as well. If you look back at that intel, so Iran has been behind so much throughout the world, if not directly involved in terrorism throughout all of our troubles with Islamist terrorism. And so to allow Iran to build that amount of liquid cash, a lot of that blood is on this administration. We normally don't get this heavily political, but I'm just being honest here. Who you vote for matters, and people's lives are at stakes when you make those types of decisions. So yeah, $80 billion of available cash to Iran, it is a travesty.
Yeah, and besides the deals we made with Iran, which were horrible and giving them billions, Iran is making bank off the war in Ukraine, right? I mean, a lot of the drones are coming from Iran, so that's become a huge profit-making venture for them, and nobody's really done anything to stop them from making money off that war, and that's another huge failing. We always ignore Iran's role in things because there's like this fear of getting involved in conflict in Iran, even though Iran's involved in every conflict with us. So people need to be honest about that and start taking it to Iran instead of enabling them.
Well, as a civilian, I still deploy, and my last two times to Iraq, and it was fairly quiet. Nothing like 2005, 6, so on and so forth. But any of the attacks that took place when I was there the last two times were Iran-based militias, funded by Iran. So, and I remember being over there thinking, man, why are we just allowing this to happen? It's very frustrating. American people, there's a lot of smart Americans, there is. But there's also a lot of people that kind of, keep their heads in the sand and don't realize, or they ignore how much connectivity there is to Iran and what we should be doing to back policies that isolates and then also destroys their weapons, programs, but we're just allowing it, to happen. And I don't know when and if Iran's going to gain a nuclear weapon, but Iran's mentality, if and when that happens, they'll use them. Your guys' thoughts on that piece. And I know we're kind of getting off your guys' book. I apologize. Because I want to circle back to it because there's so many important points, but a lot of this is related,
A lot of it is related, and it does come back to a lot of the same usual suspects. As far as Iran goes, I mean, Iran supports like the Houthis. They've been involved in terrorism in the Middle East, since the 70s and the 80s. They are complicit in a lot of things that are going on in modern times. When it comes to terrorism, you have to realize that most terrorist groups are proxies for a larger government. They're not just a couple dudes who are dissatisfied and decide, hey, we're going to start this group, start terrorizing people. There's usually another government who's pulling those strings on a higher level.
Yeah, very, very good point, Dave. So circling back to your guys' book, and we're going to absolutely have links to your guys' book in the show notes for certain. But you guys line out, I believe it's 119 specifically involved individuals, right?
Correct. Yes, we found a number of them since, but that's the number we put inside the book.
Yeah. So, for our audience out there, you guys must get this book. I was thinking about it earlier because I read through this book fairly quick to try to prepare for this interview. It is well worth reading over again and studying some of what took place and what you guys have lined out. I mean, like I stated earlier, this book is full of intelligence. Now, a lot of the leaders, like at the top, have since met their demise, but a lot of these individuals are still at large. Correct? Do you guys want to hit on that and what's being done about those individuals?
Yeah, I'll let Sarah get into it in a little more detail, but I do want to point out one thing that some of them are deceased, but all of them that are deceased and or that have been captured have not been by our U.S. military, and if they have, it was by accident. It wasn't intentional at all.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so, oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Sarah. No,
So
please.
the other piece of your question is we have about, 70 at-large attackers who we're obviously tracking on, hoping to get detained or, obviously meet their demise in a battlefield somewhere. Also, most of them haven't been watch listed, so we're constantly working to ensure none of them get on a plane to the United States or come here in an illegal fashion. Through the Darien passes, we're seeing a lot of Africans come. So yeah, it's a constant struggle of ours to keep up on these terrorists. And the sad part is our government is not tracking on our Benghazi attackers, and that should really frustrate people because. Yes, the attack was in 2012, but now our attackers are even more senior. Even the one I just mentioned that was detained, he was running al-Qa'ida in Libya and he was running ISIS in Libya. So for all those people who want to separate the two groups, hey, in Libya, the same guy was just running both. Maybe you have some intelligence gaps and maybe you don't actually understand what's happening in the world of terrorism because terrorists are coming together. If the Hamas attack showed anything, these terrorists aren't working alone. They're working collaboratively, and since the fall of Kabul, every terrorist group now has gone into Kabul, be it Sunni, Shia, it doesn't matter. Al-Qaeda is offering training and support to all of them.
Yeah, that's a very important warning to our U.S. citizenry. Again, pointing back to whom you vote for, and the fact that we precipitously just yanked ourselves out of Afghanistan. I know it's not the same thing, but we still have presence throughout Europe. We, of course, have presence in Japan. It's not like that throughout our history. We haven't had some military presence in the locations that we've had conflicts. So just to completely pull out of Afghanistan the way that we did without at least leaving a soft presence, a CIA presence, maintaining Bagram. I mean, Bagram in and of itself, having an air base that close to Asia and Russia is just, I mean, that was key strategic property, right?
Yeah, and I mean, in some of our bases now are actually al-Qaeda training camps. So we built this very nice infrastructure for them, and they're putting thousands of terrorists through these camps, and we're doing nothing about it. So we also built a terrorist infrastructure now in Afghanistan and are allowing them to use it.
Goodness, you're making me feel even worse about it. Yeah, I mean, I've understood a lot of that, but the way you so concisely describe it, Sarah, just the American people aren't tracking this. The media needs to get further behind, and that's another thing I was going to bring up is and I was kind of alluding to our audience. Are there some other podcasts that you guys have reached out to? I'll just say some big names. I mean, I would like to see you guys on shows like Jocko's podcast or Joe Rogan's. Have you guys possibly reached out to those folks or had any
We're the
interaction?
marketing team, so it's when we have time to do any marketing. So we obviously haven't talked to either of them. We've spent a lot of time, as you can imagine, trying to get the press to pick up on some of our stuff. One of our senior terrorists in our attacks in July was detained. We reached out to pretty much every press outlet there was, and the feedback we got oh, when the US government says this is okay for us to print, we'll print. So we couldn't even get them to print that our terrorist was captured. That's how controlled the narratives are around Benghazi and how weak our press is. There is no independent press anymore. And so we actually have to spend a lot of time just putting out information because no one else is doing that. And that's a full-time job besides the investigation, unfortunately.
Another
Wow.
issue we have is that, Benghazi's become taboo. And everyone thinks that, this is like a personal issue that only revolves around Benghazi and Libya. And it doesn't. As you'll see in the book, as you've seen in current events, that a lot of the people that were involved in Benghazi were involved in terrorism before Benghazi. They've been involved in terrorism after Benghazi, like the enemy's attacks in London. So it's an issue for the entire world, not just Libya, not just Benghazi. It affects all of us.
Yeah, and you guys do that again, masterfully is showing, your guys' analysis, and I would like to talk about that here in a second. But the fact that those terrorists had been working decades before in Afghanistan, and various Middle Eastern countries and throughout the world, Europe, like you stated, again, that was why I'm like, there's no way this was related to a protest. And, that's one of the sides. I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, that is so frustrating to me. Now, as far, Sarah, you mentioned, so you guys will discuss with media outlets and they'll say that the U.S. government has not allowed us to discuss that now. Is that what you're saying?
No, they'll say when they give us collaboration, to your point, we'll put it out. Even in the case of July, it was actually in the Libyan press that our terrorist was captured, and we still couldn't get the U.S. press to put it out without an official sign off from one of the public affairs offices in the U.S. government. And a lot of people have no concept that this is how we're getting the news, and that you're getting only news that has a little check mark from your U.S. government that they approved it could go out.
Well, not to get off on another subject, but we know how they've controlled social media, which, let's face it, social media, unfortunately, is where a lot of people get their information, if not the majority of the United States, and especially, in young individuals that, of course, young individuals that vote, so they're not getting the proper information. I mean, we saw what happened, with the president's son's laptop, all that, and the intelligence and FBI being involved in that. I know, not to make the bad point, you guys at the tactical and strategic level are doing yeoman's work, in the CIA. And I had this discussion with one of my good friends about how important that work is. But it gets so frustrating when we have a constitution that, in my opinion, should be civilians in charge. However, I start thinking, where does that, how do we balance that? Because of the political side. And I know that it's not something that could happen overnight, but again, if we start thinking about amending the Constitution to set term limits, especially for Congress and other aspects, maybe we can rein in some of the politics that causes some of these issues. But the very fact that there's such a political control over our safety and over policies that affect, the direction of our country and also the safety throughout the world. It's just amazing to me we're dealing with it on that level. But
yeah, and when you discuss social media really quick, I mean, luckily Twitter's different now, but when I was a senior advisor on the Benghazi committee, so I was in a government role as an executive appointment, my Twitter account was disabled, and I never got it back. So they were even disabling government employees who worked on certain topics. So people really need to understand how Facebook's controlled, how Instagram's controlled. I even get censored on LinkedIn. I got censored on LinkedIn for talking about ISIS procuring passports in 2016. Think about that. how is that protected anywhere? So yeah, people really need to understand you're not seeing this information because someone's stopping you from seeing this information.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like you said, we don't have an independent media. It's unfortunate that social media is where a lot of people get their information. But to have that kind of control over the flow of information, just, it's so Orwellian at this point. And I just, like you said, now that Twitter is now X and owned by Musk, that it seems like things have gotten better. But, still, I think that what they've turned to is they're trying to discredit X now, and I'm not a fan of social media. The only reason I have social media is because a small business, again, I have my day job. So not everything in our small business that we have, um, it's not that big of a deal, but it does help us, with marketing, social media and whatnot. So it is kind of to the point where I feel like, man, if I didn't have to have it for that purpose, I wouldn't have it at all,
Well, social media isn't bad by itself. The fact that we have all this information available at our fingertips is actually a good thing. It's just the way that it's used. It's when it's politicized, when it's used to influence. There's also so much information out there. It's hard, especially for someone who's younger, to really sift through what's correct information, what's wrong information, who's influencing me, why are they trying to influence me. So social media by itself isn't necessarily bad, and it's a very good tool. But again, it's a tool. When we weaponize it and we use it to control, that's when it becomes a problem. If you control what's being put out as fact, you control the people.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And hopefully, I'm sitting there thinking through it. It doesn't seem like that's going to change. I hope it would, but we got to have a lot of individuals wake up. We are seeing some folks say, hey, a lot of the academia, a lot of folks are realizing how far academia has gone away from what its true purpose is. But that's an uphill battle for certain. So circling back to your guys' book again, another thing that you guys did really well in the back was go through all the timelines. Now, I am curious. So there was 5 primary GRS agents, correct, Boon, with you guys? So it'd have been Mark Oz, Chris Tonto, John Tigg, yourself, Jack Silva, and of course, unfortunately, Tyrone Woods, correct? You guys were all the primary GRS on the ground.
So there was actually 6 of us.
Okay.
And then we were enforced by GRS members who came from Tripoli. So initially, there was the initial team from Benghazi at the consulate attack. Once the annex attack started, there was the initial GRS team plus some other base personnel. And then later that night, we were reinforced by members of the Tripoli GRS team.
Okay. And I am remembering that now from both the book and or some of the other media sources. So, but to that point, I'm amazed at your guys' courage and bravery for doing what you guys did. When I first read the story, and then of course, I think the movie did a fairly good job of representing what I read in the book. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on how well the movie represented what took place, but at the same time, I just want to thank you and your brothers and of course, Sarah, you guys behind the targeting, all of that. You guys probably don't hear as much as you should how thankful that we are for individuals like you. So I just wanted to put that up front. And to the issue of you guys trying to get over to the consulate, right, and help those folks. Is it true? And you guys probably get tired of answering this question. It's mainly for the audience out there. Is it true that you guys were told not to go help the consulate?
So yes and no. It is true A lot's been said about a stand down, certain verbiage that was used. Personally, I was never told to stand down that night. Um, Tig says he was, then Tig was. But I was not. What I do know happened for sure was I was delayed in responding to the consulate attack. The entire team was delayed, and that was on purpose by not only Bob, but also our team leader. And they did withhold information from us, but they weren't going to stop us from going that night. And Bob didn't have ultimate authority to tell us not to go anyway. He could delay us, in which he did, but we always could have articulated leaving without his permission, which ultimately is what we did.
Yeah, and again, your guys' bravery in that instance is definitely laudable for certain. So that had to have been frustrating, knowing at that point, because you guys at this point had been told that, of course they were trying to kidnap Ambassador Stevens because they thought that it could warrant them leverage to have other terrorists, released from prisons throughout the world, so on and so forth. But how frustrating was it at that point, knowing that you had fellow Americans, and probably some of your allies? I know that there's dubious to some of the allies within the militiamen that were on the ground, but how frustrating was that, knowing that attack was going on and that you could facilitate possibly saving Ambassador Stevens?
A lot of it's hindsight. It's extremely frustrating. There was a lot of frustration in the moment, but that frustration started to build. At first, we weren't aware of what was going on. We weren't aware that we were intentionally being held up. There's just a lot of different moving parts. We quickly realized that we were intentionally being held up, and the frustration built very quickly. Just a point that you made about Ambassador Stevens um, being kidnapped or attempting to be kidnapped by al-Qa'ida, they actually brought in their very specialized team who specialize in kidnapping just for that operation.
Yeah, another excellent indicator of what the intention was. It wasn't a protest at all. And now after unfortunately, during this whole the consulate attack, and eventually Ambassador Stevens unfortunately succumbed to to my knowledge, it was mainly smoke inhalation, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, so he succumbed, unfortunately. Um, and then eventually you guys are attacked at the annex. And to my knowledge from the book, and I'm going to probably mess up some of these names, but Sam, is that the way you pronounce it?
Wissam.
Wissam? Okay. So he was who attacked the annex, but yet he was also a part of the Libya shield, correct? That was supposed to be, allies with you guys, but he took the opportunity to attack the annex, correct?
Yeah, what actually really interestingly happened is he was outside the consulate watching the attack, and he got a phone call, and it said, "Hey, the US government is sending a bunch of guys from Tripoli. When they get on the ground, we need you to transport them." And he got enraged, being like, "I don't even want the Americans in Benghazi that are in Benghazi. Now more are coming." And he basically verbally said, and people in his vicinity heard him, "I'm going to kill all the Americans tonight." So it was at that point and from that phone call that he then started the planning for the mortar strike. And to be honest, we just identified the mortar team this fall, and we made their names public. But he basically just called up the best mortar team in Benghazi. That's how he handled it that night. He called the best team, said, "I need you to do a strike." Those are who he pulled in. They weren't even his own bodies. They weren't Libya Shield. They weren't a part of his militia. And that's who actually attacked us then at the annex.
Goodness. And unfortunately, their mortar fire was very accurate, right?
Extremely accurate. Yes. They're very professional.
Yeah, and when I look at the two compounds, well, especially I would say that either location from just a security standpoint, me thinking from a civilian and also my time as a soldier, obviously, especially mortar fire, coming from, high altitude and down, that's hard to deal with. But it also seemed like, you guys had decent defendable positions, but when a force is large enough, and that's another thing. That's what also frustrated me. It appeared to me from the outset that it was combined armed attacks, not just folks with AKs and protesting. But again, it seems like you guys had fairly defensible positions, but over time, again, bringing in a mortar team that's super accurate. I mean, there's only so much that you can do, but at the same time, you guys did, from my knowledge, did an excellent job of, defending both those compounds, or at least, especially when you guys fell back to the annex. So that was awesome from what I saw from the accounts of it. But that had to have been some hairy firefights, right, Boon?
We had a contingency to deal with most issues that we could imagine popping up. Mortars wasn't one of them. That was something that we failed to account for. But all our contingencies had a time limit, so we could deal with certain things for a certain amount of time. Then we would definitely need support from the outside.
Well, and I guess, I mean, thinking about the mortars, and there's, I mean, heck, you have to simply be able to harden the facilities, that put armor on the buildings, so on and so forth, like they do, in locations around the world. But man, that takes serious time and serious funding. People getting behind it. I guess, to me, thinking back through it, of course, that would have been nice, but that's not something that's normal in those locations, right? I mean, you guys are in those positions, in those annexes and those consulates. That's not something that's normal, is hardening for mortar fire, right?
Well, we also, I mean, he can tell you about the hardening, but we were in residential neighborhoods. So there weren't mortar fires like going on in the compounds around us. So, even the terrorists did something that wasn't common when they did it to us.
Yeah, if you think about it, like Sarah said, it was a residential neighborhood. Just imagine being in the United States and being in the middle of suburbia, and that's where we were conducting our operations from. We were trying to hide in plain sight. The annex was separate from the consulate, and that's what a lot of people don't get. State Department did what State Department does. The annex did what the annex does. So we had a working relationship, but we really weren't responsible for each other. So when it came to security and hardening of the consulate, because it didn't fit the definition of being an embassy, there's certain funding that wasn't allocated for security. That's a State Department issue. On the agency side, we were actually very well funded, and we had everything we needed to provide proper security for our annex and for the people at the annex. And although it was a residential neighborhood, we did do things to increase the survivability of our buildings, and they held up pretty well despite the 6 mortar rounds that came in.
Yeah, it certainly seemed kind of what I was alluding to earlier, especially the annex seemed like it was a well defensible position. Like, you guys certainly improved that facility, or that home or complex of homes, very well. And it did seem to me from the accounts in both books, that is it possible that Ambassador Stevens himself, did he not want to beef up the security to the point that probably was necessary? Am I wrong in that thinking? Was he trying to go ahead?
So Ambassador Stevens was actually pushing to get security, and he was even pushing to get some of the security that was left behind at the other consulates to abandon Benghazi so he could bring it over to his. The issue with Ambassador Stevens, though, is he didn't want the security to be like U.S. military, kind of like the MSD teams or whomever. He wanted them to be kind of the diplomatic security, but there was no solution when you removed one element to then plus up and make it equal. Like he lost that sight in the middle. Like, hey, if I'm drawing down 18 guys in August, I need to replace those 18, and that's kind of where he failed. So he also wasn't given the information he needed, and part of it was the CIA wasn't collecting terrorism information appropriately in Benghazi. So he was actually, there was a lot of intelligence gaps. He wasn't aware of how bad Benghazi had gotten. So he was also making security decisions for Benghazi based on limited or inaccurate information. Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, a lot of it too was a little above his head as well. The DSS guys actually requested security enhancements. Christopher Stevens did want increased security, but a lot of that was denied for optics.
Yeah. I certainly saw that in the book account, and of course in the media. You also eventually heard some of that chatter, but it was never the official narrative that security was denied. But it was clear after the fact for certain. And again, to your guys' accounts, if it wasn't for these two books and other open source that you guys have put out, that folks wouldn't know. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And there's two individuals who should have been fired and held accountable for denying those requests by State Department. It's Patrick Kennedy, obviously, saying the last name shows you something, and then a woman named Charlene Lamb, who basically was awarded and sent to Canada for her failings. So they actually had people that they could pinpoint that denied these security requests, and the State Department did nothing about it. So it was a failure of their senior leadership to do the right thing even after the fact.
Yeah, very, very, very infuriating for certain. I would, we're getting close to, we normally do about an hour and a half show. I don't know what your guys' schedule looks like. I don't want to keep you guys much longer. What you guys have been giving to our audience and to myself has been awesome. And, at some point, Dave, I would also like to have you back on to talk about some of your other firearms and self-defense training, but definitely don't want to jump off just yet, because I want to give you guys an opportunity. What would you guys like to see right now? The valuable information that you guys have put out in this book, what is it that you really want to see happen?
Well, it's twofold. We really want to educate the American public and get them behind the idea that you were lied to and justice wasn't served, with the fake mastermind being, Katala. We also want the U.S. government to take action, and the terrorists that are in custody overseas, we want access to them. We want them debriefed, and we want them tried in U.S. prison. The ones who are at large, we want them watch listed. We want them to be pursued, captured, and or killed so justice can be served.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the biggest issues involving the U.S. government and bringing justice to our terrorists is in Libya. We support the government of Libya, who is on the same side of our terrorists and the same side as al-Qa'ida. So al-Qa'ida goes in and discusses one of our captured terrorists with the government leaders in Libya, and they have more power and have a better relationship with the government of Libya than the U.S. government, and our terrorists get released. And it happens again and again and again. And so we are now again asking people to write your congresspersons about this. We should not be supporting terrorists in any country, be it Libya, be it what we're doing in Afghanistan, and even sharing information with the Taliban. Like, we need the public to actually, like Boon said, not just understand this, but you got to be a part of it. You can't complain when these things are happening or when your government's failing, when you're doing nothing to hold them accountable.
Well, we talk about quite often on this show, if you're not willing to make phone calls to your congressmen, your senators, and even the White House, and another point to make is your local politicians and how much it affects national politics. if you're not willing to sit down and make phone calls on a fairly regular basis, which doesn't take you much time, you should have the information of your local politicians saved in your phone. You should have the switchboard for your congressmen and senators in your phone, so that in a moment's notice, you can just simply make a 5-minute or less phone call, because it does make a difference. A lot of congressmen, senators at both the state and federal level, when they continue to get phone calls, and in all honesty, it doesn't have to be that many. They get steady phone calls from individuals asking for action. In some cases, action does take place, not to the degree we might want it to, but it does make a difference. But to your point, Sarah, that is the difference, is that individuals in the United States overall don't do that.
Right. And it's not even just also contacting your local press, right? Like, your basic Fox, NBC, CBS in your local community, you have more opportunity to get them to report stories, and you need to tell them what you care about. You need to flag things for them. Because that's how you get information out. The community level is where there's the least amount of influence and where we can get the most kind of play.
Yeah, that's another excellent point. And that is where a lot of important news is happening, is at the local level. And what I mean by that is, what the national media won't report, in many cases, local media will. Unfortunately, they don't have the same amount of audience members, obviously, but it does make a difference. And so I guess one other aspect of on that same note is, you yourself, you guys said that you said you don't have a marketing team. Is that what you said, Sarah?
We are the marketing
team. This is it. And I have like 2 jobs besides this. So yeah, it's pretty much at the bottom of the list.
Yeah. And to that point, Sarah, again, I have a day job. My brother has a day job. Our other partner has a day job. Frankly, on a side note, the reason we started this business, frankly, was to be able to pay for training. That's the real reason why we did it. And, we also believed that we had connections with a lot of our mentors of information we believe needs to get out on the self-defense, self-preservation side, that we thought, hey, we can have some voice. And that's kind of where it started. But what I was going to say is, and I don't know if it'll be effective or not, but one place I'm going to start is one of our sponsors is Origin. It's a jiu-jitsu and supplements company, Jocko Fuel, and they've kind of separated that part of the business. But we have some connectivity to the owners of that business, and I'm going to see if I can push your guys' book from my angle to Jocko's team, because he has a massive audience. And frankly, your guys' story is precisely the kind of stuff he likes to cover on his podcast. I can't guarantee anything because I don't know Jocko directly. We've had several of his subordinates on our show. And again, one of his companies is a sponsor of our show. So I'm going to do my best. I'm going to push it their way. I'd like to see you guys on some more podcasts like that. I know I've seen you guys on others. I've checked out some of it. I would like to see you guys on Jocko's and Joe Rogan's show. I think Joe Rogan, this is again another subject that Joe Rogan, I think would, and again, I have no connection to Joe Rogan, but heck, I can try to get him, just push it their way and see what happens. I mean, who knows? I would love to see you on some shows like that.
Yeah, I mean, we'd appreciate any support. Like you set it up to do training. We actually put our investigation in book form to continue our investigation since we self-fund it. It was kind of the only solution we could find. As you can imagine, we're to where we're having to track and locate terrorists, right, in foreign countries, and they're not all in Libya. So it is a very painstaking pricey endeavor. And now we're even tracking terrorists in Afghanistan from our attacks, so the more we can get the book out and sell the book, all the proceeds from the book go straight into the investigation. And so yeah, anybody who picks up our book, you're really helping support us.
Excellent. Now, is there a preferred location? I mean, I obviously you guys are on Amazon. You guys are on all, main locations for picking up this book. But is there a preferred location that I can put as a link for the book that you would rather? You may not want them necessarily going to Amazon. I'm not saying you don't want that, but is there another location that would be better for you guys?
If you go to Ascari Media,
Astari?
Ascari Media Group, you'll get the book directly from us.
Okay.
We can shoot you that link. And then we also just a week ago now produced it in Audible for the first time. So we know a lot of the audience wanted that. So we just want to let people know that that's available because it hasn't been.
Oh, excellent. I did see that maybe like a day or so ago. I just happened to see that you guys did have it on Audible. That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll try to throw that link in there too. But yeah, go ahead.
Cool thing about the audio, it's actually narrated by one of the fast Marines who actually responded to Tripoli.
Oh,
yes.
Cool.
So it's in the family.
And it's funny. I'm a little weird about audio books. I want to read the book in tangible form, but one of the things I noticed from Audible is it's a way I can just re-listen to it once I've read it, and I absolutely will get your guys' book on Audible because that's another way that I reinforce the information myself. So I was glad to see that for certain. Well, I guess maybe we could consider closing out. I really want to give both of you an opportunity to talk about anything else you guys have going on. Dave, I know you have your training business. You got anything big coming up in your training business that you'd like to push to the audience?
No, you can find us at Threat Management Solutions or shootingclasses.com. Shootingclasses.com, you can not only find myself, but other excellent instructors all over the country. Other than that, I appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, I will absolutely have that in there as well. As a matter of fact, I have one of those links saved on my other outline that I kept some of my personal notes on. That's excellent. And I absolutely want to get into some more of your training. I will be looking for those opportunities for certain. So Sarah, how about you?
Well, I mean, it's still book focused. One of the things we produce that a lot of people actually aren't aware of is we actually produce like a photo lineup. So basically, the first half of it is all the pictures of the terrorists at large, and then the second half is their bios. So if someone IDs it, so if anyone has relationships with, security officials in foreign governments, at airports where people get brought into secondary and might have to be able to ask questions about Libyans. Different services that have detainees, people from North Africa. This is a free resource. We have it kind of on our LinkedIn bio and our Instagram. I also share it on my LinkedIn. Anyone can reach out to us. And we provide that for free because the good thing is we don't want someone in Algeria being interested in one of the terrorists in our book and not able to buy our book, right? We want them to have the photo, his background. They can grab that one item and run with it. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to enable investigations against our attackers, even if it's not the Benghazi investigation. We want them prosecuted for some of their terrorist crimes. We don't care if it is actually just our crime.
Well, yeah, if you don't mind getting me that link as well,
Sure.
Sarah, I would love that for my own information, and we'll definitely throw that in the show notes as well.
Will do.
Yeah, it is amazing what you guys are trying to accomplish. And I did remember one other thing. I know for certain another podcast that I could push your guys' book to. And have you guys heard of the American Warrior Society show with Mike Seeklander and Rich
Yes.
Brown?
Absolutely.
Have you guys happened to have been on that show before yet?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'll shoot Rich Brown a text after we get off here and say, hey, you guys need to have you guys on if you're willing to.
Yeah, we're more than willing to always talk about our investigation, and we're trying to keep it running.
I'd be willing to put Sarah on any podcast, but I have a face for radio.
Stop.
Yeah, face for I disagree with that, brother. What I would tell you though is that they have a bigger audience than we do. So, and they've been superb supporters of us. And so, yeah, I'll definitely shoot your guys' info over to Rich Brown.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, you guys have been excellent guests. This has been so interesting to me and makes me want to pick apart way more of the information. Certainly appreciate what you guys are doing. Again, you guys are doing yeoman's work. It does contribute to our safety, whether folks understand that or not. We definitely appreciate it. So you guys have a blessed day, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.